It began, not with a confession, but with a pause. At 50, under the soft studio lights of a BBC anniversary interview, Kate Winslet smiled a gentle, almost embarrassed smile, and for the first time, allowed the world to hear what had long remained unsaid. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of years carried in silence. "I loved him," she said quietly. "Not the way people wanted us to, but yes, I loved him." For a moment, the air froze. Across the world, headlines erupted, fans gasped, and social media resurrected an old dream, the romance that never was. For nearly 3 decades, the world had worshipped them as the eternal Jack and Rose, the shipwrecked lovers of Titanic. But behind the glittering premieres and red carpet smiles lived 2 actors bound by something deeper, quieter, and far more fragile than love itself, an invisible promise never to cross the line. In the years since 1997, their names had been written together so often that even time seemed to pair them automatically. When Leonardo spoke of her, his voice softened. When Kate accepted her Oscar, she looked straight into the camera and whispered, "Leo, I am so happy I can stand here and tell you how much I love you." It sounded like a thank you. But to those who listened closely, it was an unfinished sentence. What kind of love survives without possession? What does it mean to stand beside someone for 30 years and never step closer? The story of Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet is not about forbidden romance or scandal. It is about devotion disguised as friendship, about the courage to protect something the world would never understand. Tonight, we return to the set of Titanic, to the cold Atlantic wind that first drew 2 young strangers together, and to the promise whispered between takes, "Let's never ruin this." A promise that would outlive fame, marriage, heartbreak, and distance, because sometimes the most enduring love is the one that never dares to become real. The year was 1996. The ocean set built at Fox Studios in Baja shimmered beneath blinding lights, the air heavy with the scent of salt and paint. Cameras rolled through the night as James Cameron's ambitious dream Titanic took form. The world did not yet know that history was being written in more ways than one. Somewhere amid the chaos, 2 young actors were finding a rhythm that would forever change both of their lives. Leonardo DiCaprio was 22, reckless, magnetic, untouchable. He moved through the set like a restless wave, laughing with the crew, sketching between takes, carrying the careless beauty of youth that seemed immune to gravity. Kate Winslet, 3 years older, already carried a trace of melancholy in her poise. She was grounded, instinctive, a woman who seemed to feel too much. When they first met, he teased her for being too serious. She laughed and told him he was too wild. By the second week, they were finishing each other's jokes. To outsiders, the chemistry was immediate. Even Cameron paused after their first screen test and murmured, "That's it." What the camera saw wasn't acting, it was recognition. 2 souls, mirroring each other without knowing how or why. When Titanic premiered in December 1997, the storm began. The film was not just a movie, it was an era. Teenagers fell in love with Jack Dawson, and the world declared Leonardo DiCaprio the new heartthrob of a generation. Yet beneath the avalanche of fame, what endured was the image of Jack and Rose, the frozen lovers who taught a century how to cry. At every red carpet event, Kate and Leo stood side by side, smiling through flashes of light. He adjusted her dress strap once. Almost instinctively, she wiped a piece of lint from his jacket. Cameras captured it. The audience read love in every small gesture. In interviews, journalists tried to break the wall. "Are you 2 in love?" Kate would laugh. "Oh, absolutely, but not like that." Leo would grin, eyes down, letting silence do the rest. They became Hollywood's eternal illusion, the pair who embodied love so perfectly on screen that the world refused to believe they weren't together off it. The tabloids invented stories, secret dinners, missed calls, handwritten notes. The truth was simpler and more complex. They loved each other in a way that had no script. After Titanic, their paths diverged into different galaxies of fame. Leo disappeared into a string of dark, ambitious roles: The Beach, The Aviator, The Departed. Kate built a quieter legacy, balancing motherhood with films like The Reader and Revolutionary Road. Yet the thread between them never broke. Every few years, they reappeared together: award ceremonies, private tributes, birthday messages that always seemed more personal than professional. "I am proud of you," she would tell him. "You're the best," he'd reply. Simple words. But behind them lingered an entire lifetime of shared history. When they reunited in 2008 for Revolutionary Road, directed by Sam Mendes, Kate's husband at the time the world held its breath. Once again, they played lovers, this time trapped in a dying marriage. The irony was cruel and perfect. Critics called it a full-circle moment. But for Kate, it was something deeper, a chance to confront, through fiction, what they had always avoided in life. On set, Leo treated her with a tenderness that disarmed everyone. He knew when to step closer, when to look away. Between takes, he'd crack jokes to ease the tension. She'd burst out laughing, grateful for the familiarity in a film filled with pain. Sam Mendes, watching from behind the camera, later admitted that he had never seen such natural intimacy. They trust each other in a way that's almost telepathic. He said, "The public, of course, read everything through their own lens." Magazines printed old photos of Titanic beside new ones from Revolutionary Road. "Still in love," the headline screamed. But those who knew them understood something the world refused to accept. Leo and Kate had built a fortress around their friendship, a fragile, sacred space where nothing exploitative could enter. It wasn't always easy. Fame demands definition. The press wanted labels, the fans wanted confession. Yet Leo and Kate never gave in. When one of them was attacked by tabloids, the other defended without hesitation. When Leo lost his grandmother, Kate sent flowers quietly. When she divorced, he called not to console, but simply to listen. There were rumors, of course, of love affairs, fleeting romances, and missed chances. But through every season, every partner, every headline, their bond remained constant. Even their spouses seemed to sense it, that invisible current, both safe and dangerous, that neither fame nor time could erase. They never said "I love you" the way movies do. They said it through constancy, through eye contact during an award speech, through a hand on the shoulder when words would have been too loud. The world saw glamour, the golden light of Titanic, the laughter on red carpets, the impossible beauty of two people who seemed born to be together. But what no one saw was the cost of protecting that image, the restraint, the distance, the silent promises made behind smiles. For years, they played along with the illusion, because it was easier to let the world believe in a fairy tale than to explain a truth it would never understand. And in that lie, graceful, glittering, and necessary, they found something close to peace. Until one day, the line between illusion and truth began to blur. A moment of honesty, a single interview, and the myth cracked open just enough to reveal what had always been hiding beneath it. That love had always been there, just not in the way anyone imagined. For more than 2 decades, their friendship was treated like folklore, an endless chain of interviews, tributes, and photographs, stitched together into a single, glowing myth. But the truth was quieter, deeper, and infinitely more complicated. Behind the scenes, Leo and Kate existed in a kind of emotional truce, a mutual understanding that what they shared could not be named. because to name it would break it. They never needed grand declarations. What bound them together was a pattern of small, invisible gestures, a phone call on a lonely night before an award ceremony, a text message during an especially brutal shoot, a shared silence that meant "I am here." Their closeness was so natural that even other actors noticed. During the filming of Revolutionary Road, one of the crew members said, "They don't have to rehearse affection. It's already there." But it was an affection too honest to fit into Hollywood's vocabulary. When the cameras were gone, they talked about everything except the one thing that mattered most. She told him about the fatigue of being a mother under constant scrutiny. He confessed his fear of never being truly understood beyond the image of a leading man. They laughed about their early fame, the tabloid chaos, the obsessive fans, the endless reruns of Titanic. But sometimes, late in the conversation, the laughter would fade, and they would fall into a pause heavy enough to mean what neither dared to say. There was always a line invisible but constant. It ran through every year, every reunion, every whispered conversation. They both felt it, and they both defended it. Leo once joked, "If Wed ever dated, it would have ruined everything." Kate replied, "Exactly. It's too precious to touch." The world read that line as denial, but it was, in truth, an act of reverence. Because for Kate, Leo wasn't the man she didn't have. He was the man who had always been there. The one who stood behind the curtain when she accepted her awards, who sent her orchids when her marriage fell apart, who reminded her to laugh when life became too heavy. And for Leo, Kate was not a mischance. She was his emotional compass, the person who grounded him when the industry turned savage. She called him out when fame threatened to consume him. When headlines turned him into a caricature of excess, he listened. Because with her, he could be something no one else ever allowed him to be: ordinary. The tabloids often mistook their restraint for denial, but they never understood the psychology of it. To love someone in silence is not to lack courage. It is to understand the cost of speaking. Hollywood feeds on revelation. Secrets are currency. Intimacy is spectacle. But Leo and Kate refused to trade what they had. They built an unspoken agreement: no scandals, no leaks, no crossing the line. In a world obsessed with exposure, their silence was an act of resistance. There were moments, of course, when the illusion wavered. The night Titanic won 11 Oscars, Leo, overlooked for Best Actor, disappeared after the ceremony. He hated the noise, the champagne, the celebration that felt hollow. Hours later, Kate found him sitting alone on a balcony, tie undone, looking out over Los Angeles. She sat beside him. Neither spoke. The city glittered below like a reflection of everything false. When he finally broke the silence, his words were simple: "You know, none of this feels real." She smiled. "It's not supposed to." Years later, when Kate married again, Leo walked her down the aisle. Her family and friends clapped, laughing, unaware of the quiet tremor between them. When she turned to thank him, he whispered, "You look happy." "I am," she said, and both of them knew happiness had never been the issue. It had always been timing. Because the truth they carried wasn't about romance. It was about constancy. It was about what survives when everything else fame. Marriage. Youth falls away. They had witnessed each other's transformations: the reckless boy who became an environmental activist, the fierce young actress who became a mother, a laureate, a survivor. Each saw the other's fragility and loved them not, despite it, but because of it. In the privacy of friendship, they allowed vulnerability to replace desire. No one else knew how much they had given up to keep that balance intact. When the world demanded a love story, they offered something rarer, a devotion that could not be consumed. In interviews, their affection always teetered between joke and confession. Once, when asked if she'd ever fallen for him, Kate laughed. Of course, who wouldn't? But her eyes betrayed a flicker of truth, not a lie, but the weight of something carefully held. And when Leo won his long-awaited Oscar in 2016, the camera caught her standing before anyone else, tears glimmering as if she, too, had been waiting for that moment all along. People saw sentimentality. What they missed was the echo of 20 years, the shared struggle, the mutual witnessing, the history only they remembered. He once told a friend that she was the one person who never expected me to be Leonardo DiCaprio. She once said, "He's the kind of man you don't fall in love with, because once you do, there's no coming back." That was their truth. They loved each other too much to risk losing what they had. And so they lived in that narrow space between love and restraint, where every glance was a confession and every goodbye a survival. Perhaps that's what made it endure. They understood something few ever do, that the rarest love isn't the one that burns, it's the one that stays. And so they kept their secret alive, even as the world demanded an ending. Until, one afternoon, decades later, a single interview cracked the silence. Kate's voice trembled with the honesty of someone who had stopped caring about speculation. "I loved him," she repeated. But what she meant was something the world would never fully understand. Because love, in its purest form, had already happened, just not in the way the movies had taught us to recognize it. There comes a moment in every long friendship when time itself makes the confession that neither person dares to speak. For Leonardo and Kate, that moment arrived quietly, not through a scandal, not through distance, but through recognition. It was during an interview for the 20th anniversary of Titanic. They sat side by side on a small stage, a silver microphone between them, the film's familiar theme faintly playing in the background. The audience expected nostalgia, maybe laughter. But what unfolded was something else, a small, fragile honesty slipping through the cracks of rehearsed answers. A journalist asked, "When you look back now, what does he mean to you?" Kate turned toward Leo, her eyes soft but unwavering. "He's family," she began, then paused. The pause lasted too long. She smiled to fill the silence, but her voice betrayed the tremor beneath. "I have loved him all my life." "Really?" "Just not in the way people think." The room went still. Leo looked down, smiling the way he always did when emotion threatened to escape that half smile that protected him from himself. But his eyes glistened, and for the first time, the world saw it, the truth neither had ever denied, only protected. That was the breaking point, not a confession, but the acceptance that what they shared had always been love, just translated into a different language. Afterward, when the camera stopped rolling, she reached for his hand. "Are you okay?" she whispered. He nodded. "I just didn't think you'd ever say it out loud." She smiled. "Neither did I." Outside, the world was already rewriting the moment. Headlines bloomed like wildfire. Kate Winslet finally admits she loved Leonardo. Social media erupted with nostalgia. Fans resurrecting photos, dissecting glances, replaying interviews as if to collect proof of what they'd always wanted to believe. But for Leo and Kate, the revelation wasn't a scandal. It was relief. They had spent half their lives defending a boundary the world refused to respect. Now, in middle age, they no longer needed to pretend. They had lived through marriages, losses, triumphs, and the slow erosion of illusion. They had learned that love can exist without conquest, that it can be steady, clean, and brave enough to survive without being named. In private, they laughed about it. "Maybe now they'll finally leave us alone," Leo joked. "They won't," she said, grinning. "They never do." But deep down, she felt something else, not regret, Not nostalgia, but a quiet gratitude, because he had kept his promise. Through the chaos of fame, through decades of temptation and distance, Leo had never crossed the line. He had loved her in a way that protected her from the world and from himself. There were times, of course, when it could have gone differently. On the night of her divorce, she called him. She didn't need advice, she just wanted to hear his voice. He stayed on the phone for hours, mostly listening. When she began to cry, he said softly, "You'll be fine. Katie, you've always been fine." She laughed through her tears. "You sound like Jack Dawson again." And he answered, almost under his breath, maybe he never really drowned. He meant it as a joke, but she heard the truth inside it. A piece of him had stayed behind with her, frozen in time, untouched by everything that came after. Years later, when Leo finally won his Oscar, the camera found her first. Tears welled up in her eyes, not just for his victory, but for the long road they had walked together. In that moment, she wasn't an actress applauding a colleague. She was the girl from 1997, watching her best friend finally come home. What the world saw as cinematic coincidence was, in truth, a full circle. Their story had always been about survival of the ship, of their bond, of the idea that love could outlast desire. Leo once said in an interview, "Kate knows me better than anyone." He wasn't exaggerating. She had seen every version of him, the reckless boy, the reluctant star, the environmental crusader, the man who still doubted his own worth. And she never asked him to be more than himself. In turn, he watched her transform from the fearless young woman who climbed the Titanic's bow to the mother, the activist, the artist who carried her own quiet strength. He adored her, not for her beauty, but for her refusal to pretend. What they shared was not a romance deferred, but a love fulfilled in another form, one that transcended category. It was loyalty, tenderness, recognition, a relationship that had matured beyond the language of possession. But still, every so often, when they met at dinner, an award ceremony, a private call, there was a flicker of the past, a glance too long, a silence too full, the awareness that had life been slightly different, so might they. And yet, neither wished to rewrite history. They had already lived something few people ever do, a love that outlasted youth, fame, and fantasy. In a world that prizes the visible, they had chosen the invisible, and somehow it had become more real than anything captured by a camera. When she later said, "He's my anchor," it was not metaphor. Leo had been the constant pull that kept her grounded when the current of fame threatened to sweep her away. And she, in return, had been the compass pointing him back to what mattered when the world grew too loud. They had saved each other, quietly, completely. And so the revelation was never about romance. It was about endurance, the rare kind of connection that doesn't end when the credits roll, because it was never scripted to begin with. Their love story had no kiss, no confession, no tragedy. Just two people, standing on opposite sides of a line drawn in compassion, not fear, and knowing that sometimes the line itself is what makes love last. In the end, what remains between Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet is not a story of love lost. It is the story of love preserved. Some relationships burn bright and fast, devouring everything around them. Others endure like candlelight, soft and constant, flickering quietly in the corners of our lives. Theirs was the latter, the kind that survives precisely because it refuses to demand too much. They never needed to call it love for it to be true. They lived it. In gestures too subtle for the tabloids to notice, a hand steadied on a red carpet, a quiet smile from across the room, a loyalty that outlasted every season of fame. In a world obsessed with ownership, they chose something radical to care without claiming, to protect rather than possess. They understood that real affection is not about taking, but about standing guard over the one thing that must never be broken: trust. Perhaps that is why their story feels timeless. It teaches that intimacy is not measured by proximity, but by endurance. That there are loves which do not need a kiss to be complete. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to love without asking for more. For decades, the world tried to fit them into its own version of romance Jack and Rose Reborn, destined to collide. But Leo and Kate chose instead to prove that love can exist in quiet forms, in constancy, in loyalty, in the sacred space between two people who refuse to let time or desire corrupt what they have built. Maybe that is what makes their connection so haunting, the knowledge that something could have been, but never had to be. That a single decision not to cross the line allowed a rare and fragile beauty to survive. And so, as the years pass and the ocean between their youth and their present grows wider, one truth endures: love is not always about crossing boundaries. Sometimes, it is about drawing them and keeping them, gently, for a lifetime. Because perhaps the truest love story is not the one that ends in an embrace, but the one that never ends at all.